All right, thank you. I am your gatekeeper from lunch, so I'll aspire to be on time, but certainly ask me questions as we go. Here talking about adventures in Bitcoin surveillance. Over the past year and a half, I've done a lot of cryptocurrency mining projects and talk about some of that in terms of how it can help investigators and enterprises figure out what's going on the blockchain or some of the threat actors that they're facing. This talk is all public, so feel free to use whatever content you want. About me, I'm here as Vice President of Research and Intelligence at ThreatStop. It's a small company based in the US, but I wear a variety of different hats. I also teach at the University of Illinois, produce a lot of open source threat feeds myself, and try to assist law enforcement going after criminals and actually put some of them in jail. I was actually the one from the last talk, Kay, who mentioned what to do about GDPR and the blockchain. That was actually my question, right? How do you have a right to be forgotten in an immutable blockchain where you can't make changes, right? So first, right, what is the blockchain, right? And what is Bitcoin? What is all this about, right? Because a lot of people talk about it, but there isn't really, a lot of good information. In essence, it's a peer-to-peer public ledger that keeps transactional information, right? Cryptocurrency itself is built upon that. The most prominent of that is being Bitcoin. There is about 800 different cryptocurrencies. This obligatory Venn diagram, because I probably can't see it towards in the back of the room. People who don't know anything about math, investing in cryptocurrency, the intersection of that is Bitcoin, right? So I am kind of a cynic about it. I don't see it as having any real long-term viability, but it's here, and it's something that we have to deal with. But it's an interesting sociological phenomenon. Why is this a thing, and why does it have the value that it does, right? So why do people and why do users like Bitcoin, right? Is the idea that there is no centralized authority, right? There are no credit checks, there's no financial regulation, there's no banks to say you can't do that, or all of the fees associated with banking, right? There's a very easy way to move assets across country boundaries, right? One of the things, other hats I wear, is I run a small international charity, right? And just moving money from the United States to Africa to build schools is a lot of hassle, right? In Bitcoin, there is no hassle to be had. I just send money from one wallet to another, assuming I've got the private key. I think what a lot of people are attracted to Bitcoin is that you can mine money basically out of nothing. You can use commodity hardware and create Bitcoins, and now you've got money. So why do criminals like it? There is no centralized authority. There's no one to interdict their funds. There isn't any way to back out fraudulent transactions. A couple of weeks ago, there was a double payment vulnerability in Bitcoin Cash, where essentially you can spend the same Bitcoin twice, and criminals made a couple $1 million US doing that, right? The exchanges basically knew who did that. They knew that this happened, but there wasn't a way to undo it. And again, criminals like it because they can mine money out of nothing. One of the biggest growing and probably most prominent by frequency, however you'd want to measure this, forms of malware right now is cryptojacking or crypto miners, where in essence, innocent computers are being used to mine Bitcoin, right? Threats against Jenkins, right? There may be software developers here who have Jenkins installs, right? Those are being compromised because there's lots of slave machines behind Jenkins to use various forms of cryptocurrency mining, right? So there's lots of interesting criminal threats that are possible with Bitcoin that make it a very attractive ecosystem for them, right? Why I like it. I am somewhat of a skeptic in terms of the economics of all of it, but I got into this. I spent a lot of my time previously on the many aspects of the 2016 elections, right? Investigations involving both presidential candidates, and that's still an ongoing dumpster fire of an issue in the United States, so I needed something else to focus on, right? But I like Bitcoin as an intelligence analyst because I can see people's financial transactions. The public ledger means I can see everybody who transacts with everybody else. There is this anonymous wallet identifier, but other than that, I can see how things move, and if I know what to look for, I know how to find things, right? So I don't have to bribe bankers to get information or use legal process. The relationship between wallets is very easy to see, and all the transactions are available throughout all of time. I can tell you exactly what Satoshi Nakamoto has done with his early Bitcoins. There's one specific investigation I have that's traced back the origin of funds to 2011, right? There's lots of interesting possibilities there. But all the criminals, pretty much, aside of, say, crimes of passion, operate in cryptocurrency somehow. If I wake up tomorrow and say, you know what, I'm interested in looking at human trafficking is operating in Bitcoin or a cryptocurrency, right? There's certainly the cybercrime ecosystem generally. Ransomware has had an enormous impact on cryptocurrency. And I think the value, and I posit, I can't really prove this scientifically, the value of Bitcoin and cryptocurrency generally has been driven to a great extent simply by ransomware. In 2013, when CryptoLocker happened, that was the biggest introduction to Bitcoin the world had because, hey, I've got this malware on my machine, I want my files back, and I've got to pay $300 in Bitcoin, and it gave you instructions of where to find that. That was the introduction of broader society into Bitcoin. And now that we have cyber insurance companies that have to pay Bitcoin ransoms for hospitals at millions of dollars of a level, right? Insurance companies are stockpiling Bitcoin. So a lot of criminality focuses on cryptocurrency somehow. So, you can basically mine for all sorts of misconduct in there. There's certainly been a lot of weaknesses in the ecosystem in terms of the exchanges, right? The inherent weakness of cryptocurrency isn't the algorithm or the blockchain technology or peer-to-peer. It's the places where you can turn it into money and vice versa. So you've got one exchange in here where an employee stole $3 million. This was the top article was something at the end of 2017 where somebody stole $77 million from an exchange, but over $15 billion has been stolen in rough US equivalent currency, in cryptocurrency from the exchanges themselves, right? In essence, bank robberies. So there's two general problems, right, in cryptocurrency security, both of which are relevant for investigators. The first is, as long as you stay within the Bitcoin ecosystem itself, it's pretty secure, right? You know, there's ways to protect your privacy. You can rotate through wallets. There's all sorts of things that you can do, right? Keeping your cold wallet offline so nobody could steal your funds. So you've got a USB drive with a private key sitting in a safe somewhere. Well, if I can't access the private key, I can't force transactions out of a wallet. The problem with this, of course, is that security is hard. It takes a lot of effort, and most people are lazy and don't want to do it, right? You know, but if you spend the effort, it can be relatively secure, right? And as I mentioned, the bottom point, the e-money, right, your digital money doesn't mean anything until you can cash it out. And you've got to cash it out in radically small number of places. You can have web wallets, and various exchanges do this, where instead of maintaining your own wallet and your own infrastructure, some third party will do that for you. The previous slide shows you the end result of that, is that these exchanges, as a class, have been a very poor example of doing that correctly, right? And some facts would come back to, right? You know, what is the value of Bitcoin? For as much as people talk about cryptocurrency, how it's going to revolutionize everything, its value is still measured in dollars or whatever currency, right, that you care about. Because ultimately, the only value that this has is your ability to turn it into cash or turn it into some kind of product that you want, right? It's still measured in raw dollars, right? And your ability to cash it out is where the real value is. There are plenty of people who are Bitcoin billionaires, but they will never be able to realize that wealth because they won't be able to get it out of the ecosystem at that scale. If you took, and this is a US-centric example, right? You know, a lot of Bitcoin and cryptocurrency people will talk about how decentralized it is. If you took the top 10 biggest banks in the United States, transactional banks, right? Savings accounts, checking accounts, things of that sort, that they control 55% of all the wealth in the United States. it's an apples to oranges comparison, but if you did similar, if you took the capital, the market cap of the 10 biggest cryptocurrency exchanges, that's 70% of market share, right? There is maybe 200 some odd exchanges, right? I am sure there's probably 200 individual banks just in Queensland, probably many more than that, right? The number of places that you can turn that money into something else is radically small, which gives us a lot of opportunities to gather intelligence either via legal process or some other means. Like I said, Bitcoin can be very secure. You've got a couple of steps you can go through, right? You use small amounts for everyday use. You basically have a cold wallet that has all your wealth in it. That's offline somewhere in a safe deposit box. You back up your wallet, you encrypt it. Many of the Bitcoin thefts involved are simply by people who don't encrypt their wallet, so that someone get access to a private key file, and then they can transact money. As an example of this, on one day as a whim, I'm sure some of you at least have VirusTotal, or at least a private API, that allows you to basically search for any file type you want. I searched for Bitcoin wallets, right, the private keys, to see if anybody had submitted a private key of a Bitcoin wallet to VirusTotal. There was a bunch there, but only one of the wallets I found had roughly at the time $17 million worth of assets, right? It's in a cloud service, I could have downloaded that at, I could have transacted at, and I could have left this whole cybersecurity industry behind and just retired someplace at a nice resort in the South China Sea, right? There's also multi-signature wallets. The problem is these require effort, and human beings are basically lazy and don't want to go through that, right? So, to be fair, we as security practitioners are not much better. Just a show of hands, how many people frequently and often actually use GPG encryption for their email? Or SMIME, right? All right, let's be fair of SMIME. We know better and we still don't do it, right? And because it's not particularly user-friendly, right? GPG is fairly secure, it's just a pain, right? So people will use the same wallet for everything, which means I can now attribute their conduct over the entire lifetime of a wallet, right? People use online services because, this company has got money, they've got a SOC, they pay for security, they'll keep my money, they'll keep my e-money safe, right? A few slides ago, we saw that wasn't true, right? It's very hard also to buy Bitcoin unless you deal with an exchange. You can mine it, but for Bitcoin specifically, it's now kind of outside the realm of commodity hardware. For any of you who are gamers who want a decent GPU, it's hard to buy GPUs now because everybody's buying them in mass to make huge Bitcoin mining rigs. There are other currencies that are within the realm of commodity hardware. But you can use a service called Local Bitcoins to basically transact cash or something for cryptocurrency. Is the only exception. Otherwise, you're basically dealing with all of these exchanges. As I said, the exchanges are the weak point, right? If you want to seize a wallet, if somebody's using a web wallet, you can do it there, right? If you want to create a blacklist, these are wallets that no one should ever transact to. We'll get back to that in a moment. You can send that to a handful of these exchanges, and they might act on that. If you want to get information, more information, right? The public ledger will tell you which wallets transact with who, when, and at what volume, how many Bitcoins were transacted. But if people are using actual exchanges, there's basically two flavors. One, where they register an account, they have to verify identity and go through a lot of steps. For Coinbase, which is one of the largest ones in the United States, they want to see a photocopy of an ID, they want bank accounts, they want your social security number in order for you to transact at any real volume. And real volume is defined as like $25,000 a day, which is not huge in the grand scheme of things. There are others that cater to criminals and or just really privacy-centric that in essence require no information, right? We'll come back to those in a little bit, but there's ways to get information out of them because by not requiring authentication in the sense that we think of authentication, There's lots of ways to get information out of there. It's the same problem with Bitcoin is without a centralized authority telling you a transaction has taken place, the public ledger was created basically to create trust in the ecosystem. They had to disclose information so that people could be confident money went from wallet A to wallet B. Similar thing by creating exchanges without any real authentication, right? So on to some of the projects that I've worked on in terms of surveillance and tracking and investigation. The first is dealing with neo-Nazis or white supremacists, probably more accurately white supremacists. In Charlottesville, Virginia, a roughly small city in the United States, white supremacists had a rally about Confederate statues. Violence ensued. A young woman was killed because a white supremacist drove a car into her. 2 police officers were killed when their helicopter had crashed as they were surveilling the protest. So it was a pretty significant event in the United States, right? These groups have been around for a while. White supremacy is not exactly a new phenomenon in the United States, but this was kind of their very public rally and presence and activity, right, that dealt with violence or that culminated in violence, right, in the United States. They've generally been fairly private since the 1980s, right? They have since gotten more public, and now they're going back private again. There's also another note, an interesting anecdote, which I don't think gets enough press because, at least as an intelligence analyst, I find it an interesting thing, is that if you look at all of the mass shootings in the United States in, say, the past 3 years, almost all of them have some sort of connection to these groups and white supremacist ideology. The school shooting that took place about 2 weeks ago, there was pictures of the shooter with Nazi regalia doing a Nazi salute and all of that, right? So there's an interesting nexus that requires, more investigation that's outside my expertise, but there's a connection there to white supremacists. So after Charlottesville, I kind of started taking a look around at these groups. I was vaguely aware of them. Some of the individuals are on my radar for computer crime to begin with. But this is basically just one portion of their website called the Daily Stormer. It's a fairly prominent white supremacist website that says, hey, we need money, donate Bitcoin to us, and there's their wallet identifier right there. Okay, well, that's interesting. I wanted to see how much money was in there, and in essence, a little less than $1 million. They have real wealth, right? If you went through all of the various white supremacist Bitcoin wallets, some only have a couple $100s. But if you look at Daily Stormer, Weave, who's associated with several different groups, and Countercurrents, right? It's 6 to 7 figures worth of wealth, right? Money and assets to really accomplish something if they were organized, right? So this became interesting. It's like, okay, I should take a look at that and see what I can figure out about their money, about their sources of funds. So a bit about attribution, right? The last slide, you see that little Bitcoin wallet string. It's an anonymous identifier, right? There is a difference between anonymity and privacy that most people don't really grasp. Even in our community, right? We kind of gloss over the nuance between those two. That wallet identifier is anonymous, but it is not private. I can see all the transactions it's doing, right? The analogy between anonymity and privacy I like to use is somebody who's wearing a mask at a protest, right? Say it's an anti-government protest, whatever reason, they feel the need to conceal their identity, right? So they put a mask over their face. Well, if they have a distinctive tattoo on the back of their neck, well, now I've got something that can attribute to their real identity. The same is true with cryptocurrency. These neo-Nazi groups want to raise money. They want money from other people. So they have to advertise their wallet on Twitter, on Gab, on their websites. So I know exactly who they are, right? They have broken anonymity simply by tying their name to that wallet identifier, right? In a lot of cases, attributing Bitcoin wallets because of that dynamic is really just a Google problem. My first step when I see a new Bitcoin wallet is simply to just copy and paste it into Google and see what websites link to it or what Twitter feeds. And it is successful a lot of the time to just figure out who's behind a given wallet. You can identify donors this way also, right? Because people will advertise their wallets because they want to transact, right? They want transactions, and they have very little choices. Some will use private messages or email, but many will do it over Twitter and other means where you can attribute them, right? But certainly for groups, they advertise this. There is a list on a website, on Blogspot, that says, here's various neo-Nazi organizations you see on the left of the slide there. Here is their donation wallets. That made work a whole lot easier. Let's go through the list of these and see how much money is involved, right? This top wallet is Daily Stormer, right? And at the time I captured that, they had received about 40 Bitcoin, which in today's dollars, I don't know, I haven't really checked lately. I think it's around 320,000, 340,000. At the peak when Bitcoin was around 20,000, right, that was 800,000. At the time I did this and started doing this was August, right, and we got to peak Bitcoin, so to speak, in December, right? So they crested almost $1 million in wealth. The bottom one is Weave, that's 194 Bitcoin, right? And you can do the math in there. That's a whole lot of wealth controlled by him, right? And mapping his transactions backwards, right? See exactly how he got his wealth. He'd been in Bitcoin for a long time. People were paying him because he's, in essence, a self-imposed fugitive somewhere near the Russian border right now, who basically gives contract IT support to extremists in exchange for Bitcoin or Monero. So that's how he survives. And the other aspect of his money is he's made a lot of money, more than I think luck can account for in online gambling. Because online casinos, right? I know what their wallets are. They're fairly easy to find because so many things transact with them. And in many ways, they have to advertise also. You want to gamble on this website? Send Bitcoin to these addresses and we'll populate your account with money so that you can go play Texas Hold'em online or whatever you do on online gambling sites. So I thought, well, is it possible to disrupt their fundraising, their ability to primarily raise, but also spend money, right? And what got me thinking about this was WannaCry, which happened 6 months prior. Somebody had created code to basically monitor all their transactions on Twitter. Various exchanges had blacklisted the WannaCry wallet, so if victims wanted to pay, they were unable to do so with the mainstream Bitcoin exchanges. Why not do something similar here to say, one, all right, let's track all of their transactions and publish it, and two, talk to the exchanges to say, hey, don't let people donate here, right? The exchanges were surprisingly helpful, or many of them, not all of them, right? Where they didn't even really need social pressure to blacklist, and they're like, nah, to hell with those guys. We don't want them. We don't want them benefiting from our services, right? So I created a Bitcoin tracker, in essence, a fork off of the WannaCry Bitcoin tracker that could be repurposed for anything you want. You just put in your wallet identifiers and whatever name you want to call it, right? So from here, I can see exactly their transactions in real time. The top one is somebody gave $100 to Radio Aryan. The second one is Weave withdrew $400. The bottom one is somebody gave Richard Spencer $50, right? The nuance of this is difficult, right? Because, the money is approximate because it's relying on one API call to give me the exchange rate for Bitcoin. But in essence, right, there's a fair amount of variance in terms of the value of Bitcoin between various exchanges. So the dollar amounts are approximate. The value or the number of the quantity of Bitcoin is specific, right? The fact of publishing them made them somewhat aggravated, right? And this is the most printable Twitter message that I had, right? Despite the homophobic slur that I blacked out. Many of them got somewhat aggravated about it, which amused me somewhat. The more interesting impact was what it did to their fundraising. So you saw, right, the donation appeal. Oh, we're being sued. Daily Stormer is actually being subject to more than a few lawsuits right now. They're evading service, so the lawsuits haven't really gone much beyond the initial phases. but there's significant dollar amounts that they're facing, and they're saying, hey, we need to hire lawyers. Well, when I started publishing this, people were seeing, and the other potential donors are saying, you guys are sitting on almost $1 million. What do you need a donation for, right? You've got real money. So certainly that impacted their fundraising of just the publicity of how much money they were actually sitting on. Many of the exchanges were blacklisting them, right? So an interesting aspect of this community, there is maybe a half a dozen neo-Nazis who are relatively tech savvy. You know, they can use Tor hidden services and know how to go through various hops to move Bitcoin around, right? Weave has very good practices with his Bitcoin wallet, for instance. Your garden variety neo-Nazi is a moron when it comes to technology. They just have no idea how to do things. So when Coinbase blocked them, you know, they had no idea where else to go. It took some effort. When Daily Stormer got kicked off the conventional internet, they moved to a Tor hidden service, which is a very logical, technical thing to do. Except their user community could not figure out Tor. They just didn't know how to use it, right? And now I think they're, I forget what TLD, I think they're hanging out on .red. Interestingly enough, for a while they were operating dailystormer.ru. Even the Russians kicked them out of their namespace. Right? I mean, how bad do you have to be when the Russians don't want anything to do with you, right? Some of their donors were outed by researchers, right? So that that created some pressure for some of their donor community to not be overly involved, right? They could move to Monero. There are a couple of privacy-centric cryptocurrencies out there. Monero is probably the most prominent, but there's no direct cash to Monero exchange that's accessible, for the most part, right? You have to go to Bitcoin, then you have to turn your Bitcoin into Monero, and then send your Monero someplace else. Well, that was too much effort for your garden variety neo-Nazi. They couldn't handle that either, right? So they're starting to have some real financial trouble, and there's a lot of infighting between the various groups. You know, they're facing a lot of lawsuits, so, you know, they're back into whatever basement, you know, they've been hiding in. Still a problem, but a lot less prominent and public of a problem involving conflicts in parks and big rallies, right? I did mention Monero. There are ways to follow those transactions, because when you don't have authentication, but you still want to have a transaction, and you want to have people have trust in that transaction, you have to design things a different way that ultimately require you to expose information without authentication, right? So there now becomes ways to see exactly how they're transacting. So in this case, this is money going into Weave's Monero wallet. Now, I didn't have to attribute that wallet. He will tell you that this is my wallet in Monero, right? I can't do the same things of saying exactly how much money is in his Monero wallet, but I can enumerate all the people that have turned Bitcoin or other conventional cryptocurrencies into Monero and sent it to that wallet, right? And that kind of aggravated him a little bit, you know, where they banned me from his Reddit because I let them know that I knew. And for people who like complaining about free speech, they like their censorship when it's critical of them. So that led into a different project, right, which I haven't fully exposed yet, but creating a cross-currency database, right, to say, oh, this Ethereum wallet is tied to this Litecoin wallet, or this Bitcoin is tied to this Monero wallet, where there'll be a query system that'll be at that URL where you can say, hey, I've got a Bitcoin wallet. Is it tied to anything in other alternative, what are called altcoins? Basically, any cryptocurrency that's not Bitcoin is lumped into the altcoin category, right? There's a broader use case behind that, right? Beyond neo-Nazis, right? Which is what we're going to go into next to say, oh, going back to WannaCry, right? Is they're moved money out of those donation wallets, or the 3 WannaCry wallets in August. So the old tracker was still tracking payments, right? So you see on the left two slides, they withdrew 23,000 some odd and 20,000 some odd in the 2nd of August. What's interesting to me is you take a look on the right side, is that in September, a month and a half after they moved money out of their Bitcoin wallets, and about 5 months after WannaCry, people were paying them. The last time, and I haven't checked in a couple of days, somebody paid a WannaCry ransom last week. It's been over a year, and they're still making money with this, right? And I think there's some more research to be had there. I don't understand why somebody would do that, right? But it's an interesting phenomenon that's still happening, right? Ransomware, even after the kill switch is enabled, apparently still doesn't die. And that's the only thing I could think, is that somehow some local organization blocked the kill switch domain so that the ransomware still propagated in an environment, and somebody thought they could pay the ransom and get away with that. So the short version is doing the same technique. I was able to follow where North Korea parks their WannaCry holdings, is that Monero wallet. Because they basically transacted through 3 chains. As you could see, through these wallet relationships, these little circles are wallets, their own wallets. They go to 2 different services and ultimately transact that into a different altcoin, right? And that's their Monero wallet, where they're parking their funds. Because Monero is very ideal. North Korea is an odd nation-state actor, where a lot of their behavior is very similar to cybercrime because of the economic sanctions they've been operating under. They have hard capital needs, and they try to get around that with cryptocurrency, because you can't enforce sanctions in the blockchain, or at least nobody's figured out how to do that yet. So they have a lot of activity in Monero, and they've been doing a lot in ransomware as a result, right? So this got me also thinking, right? What about attributes of transactions? A lot of the services, both commercial and free services involving Bitcoin monitoring, involved, hey, this wallet has transacted with this wallet. But there's lots of other data to be had there, right? You know, there's time, there's transaction amounts, in some cases there's IP address, right? So going back to neo-Nazis, there's a specific number they like using as sort of a slogan of sorts, 1488. And that stands for a 14-word slogan from David Lane and some white supremacist manifesto, and 88, which is either Heil Hitler or the 88 Precepts, also from David Lane. So they will sit there and say 1488 as a way of just covertly doing a neo-Nazi salute online, right? So as an example of ways of doing this, to say, hey, I'm a friend of the cause while donating money, they will donate in the precise amount of 1488, either 14.88 Bitcoin or 0.1488 or 0.01488, but there's that specific amount, 1488 somewhere, just the decimal place moves, right? What got me first onto that is after Daily Storm was kicked offline, they got a donation of 14.88 Bitcoins, right? Which was, at the time, roughly $10,000, right? No, it was more than $10,000, $100,000, right? So it was a whole lot of money that they got donated, but specifically 14.88, right? So I got the idea. It's like, okay, now I know this is a neo-Nazi thing, right? So instead of just looking at wallets that I'm seeing on Google, let's just see how many people out there are beaconing that number, basically doing the digital equivalent of a Nazi salute in the blockchain, right? So you see a couple of transactions here, the top and the bottom one, where there's a wallet that was transacting 0.1488. Blockchair.com offers a service where you can sit there and look at aspects of a transaction and do searches, right? So in this case, I was looking for specifically 0.1488. This came up with 400 some odd transactions. So these are people who were basically transacting outbound 1488. I won't say that that never can organically occur. Usually when people do Bitcoin transactions, they're either transacting in full dollar amounts or full normal currency where I want to pay somebody 300 or 500 or 1,000. Or they're transacting in relatively round numbers of Bitcoin where I'm sending you 0.1 Bitcoin or 0.55. It's possible somehow the currency values at the time or the exchange values at the time mapped to whatever transaction amount to be 1488, but that's extremely rare, right? So did all of that to basically organically look for how many transactions had this Nazi salute, and so far found 4,500, right? There's some limitations of this search. Basically, to do it correctly, I'm going to have to sit there and download the entire blockchain and go transaction by transaction to get it all. But just using the Blockchain service, found 4,500 Nazi transactions, of which 4,200 to 4,300 were new, right? Involving wallets I had no previous knowledge of, right? So now, right, knowing that specific signal, you can look for those kind of transactions. So looking for dollar amounts, right? Some other interesting possibilities show up is that cryptocurrency generally, going back to ransomware, there's usually a $300 or $500 or $1,000 amount they're looking for. But what got me thinking about this is a story in November that somebody paid an actual hostage ransom in Bitcoin at $1 million. And thinking it's like, all right, can I search for that programmatically in the blockchain to see if I can find when people are spending $1 million ransoms, right? So I created another tracking service called BitCoin, where I track every transaction more than $500,000 US. There used to be a Twitter feed. Twitter blocked it. I don't know why, but the account's banned. But you get an idea as it goes for every block. Every time there's one new block mined in Bitcoin, it parses the entire block, looks for all transactions of $500,000 or more, and then aggregates them into a report. It tries to eliminate self-dealing because exchanges will balance their wallets. So there's a lot of kind of circular self-dealing transactions. I try to eliminate. They're not completely eliminated, but it's there. So this is what it looks like in terms of the HTML report. It says, okay, on December 18th, there were 2,700 transactions overall. 132 of them were over $500,000, where $161 million in US equivalents changed hands, right? There's a lot of money that moves around inside the Bitcoin ecosystem, right? And like I said, this eliminates some of the self-dealing that you would expect with exchanges balancing their own funds, right? So you see that top one, somebody sent out exactly 50 Bitcoins at the time worth a little less than $1 million, right? So from there, this is some subject of ongoing academic research to get an idea of how Bitcoin is being used for large dollar transactions and at scale. And certainly, like I said, there's a lot of money. There's a lot of money moving around in that ecosystem every day. All right. So takeaways, right? The important difference between privacy and anonymity. Just because something isn't necessarily tied to your name, it's anonymous, but I can still see a lot of information, right? And in the blockchain, right, there's enormous wealth of criminality to be found. I'm not saying everybody uses Bitcoin as a criminal, but all criminals are using Bitcoin or cryptocurrency. So as an intelligence analyst, it's a bit like fishing in a pond with unlimited fish. There are tools to look at interactions of wallets, a lot of commercial tools, but free ones also with blockchain.info and others. And you can do a lot just with that API. You could track attributes of transactions. Blockchair.com has an API also that's free and open. Well, it's free and open, but there are limits to what you can do with that, right? But certainly, right, for looking at ways to impact the use of the criminal use of Bitcoin is putting pressure on the exchanges, or at least getting information out of them. Many of them are regulated. Many of them have all sorts of information. So as an investigator, that's where you can go. That is the weak point of the entire infrastructure and ecosystem is the exchanges, because Bitcoin is in essence useless until I can turn it into something I really want. Any questions? Sir? Oh, microphone coming your way.
And it'll have to be quick because it's lunchtime.
I'm just curious about the outcome of your search using the digits 88 in Bitcoin.
1488, yeah.
Yeah. So did you happen to find a lot of transactions from China? Because I know the number 8 is actually a lucky number in China.
That's good. I didn't really know that aspect, and that in China it was a lucky number. That might explain the volume. 4,500 was more than I would expect of Nazis, but it's hard to really know the location of a transaction directly just by mining the blockchain. Sometimes there's IP addresses, but those IP addresses could be a commercial service, right? There's nothing, there might be prohibitions for Chinese citizens using Coinbase now, but they could just be using a conventional exchange, so there's no good way to enrich that data with that information, directly anyway. Unless somebody more clever than I has an answer. Other questions?
Well, if everyone can please thank John for his illuminating talk.
Thank you.